I find the successor to debates about continuity sitting in my driveway, cross-legged, with a Walkman and her head going slightly, and the tips of her fingers tap-tapping on the side of a cheap but reliable deck chair with a lightweight aluminum frame and once perfect forest green dye job slowly going lime. She stares through sunglasses to a point across the street I can't determine. Her feet twitch too, occasionally, with the tap-tapping, and for someone whose extremities are so indefatigably active, her core and neck and head are unbelievably still. Brenda, my own voice, foreign from the open kitchen window. We don't quite live in a house. It's three-fourths of a house, maybe, up against a short lawn. We share two walls and no doors with the neighbors, and the front room juts peninsular into that little strip of grass and concrete we call our own front yard. Across the street are the normal houses, red-roofed, leaning against each other and pushing her own silhouette back against the asphalt. She should chew gum or something. It's so strange not seeing her jaw move. Brenda. You know I'm out here, she says, the corner of her jaw working, the right crescent of sunglasses obscured by black hair pulled back gleams. The other lens is blocked. Her hand's motion holds relentless. I was thinking about getting an inflatable. Inflatable what? Inflatable pool or something. We don't have a backyard. We don't have shame either. We just need a front. She says nothing and does no looking back, conversationally forced, her stares artificially maintained. Still, I love it. I could be its object. I think, should I cross driveway and grass and stand before her and put my hands on my hips and say whatever? I know so. I walk to work most days. Sometimes she comes along. It's the more feline of our interactions, this walking. She goes however far and turns around, often running back to the three-quarters house. Not always fully dressed for it, but making the decision anew every time. Today, I'll just run/walk back there. That's only on the days she comes. She insists on it when she does. This accompaniment. When interrogated, she says that she feels bad. It's not entirely obvious what she means by this, and certain mannerisms prevent it from being wholly empathetic. But hey, we all take what we can get. There's a wrinkle on her nose, I've long found, that catches perfect with the squinting of amber eyes that, in certain lighting, match my own and sit there on an uneven level, with pupils and lighting I can with some certainty call my own, because the camera's sticking out of my head and the lens runs right inside of hers. She claimed once to see my thoughts. She said they ran the same few places which aren't, in all honesty, that far apart from each other. She says it's a flat plane at the bottom of a tall mountain which wraps perfectly around, and then the metaphor falls apart. Many things fall towards the base of the mountain, and it's because of something inherent to the falling things. She cites this metaphor on occasion, not thinking I'm hearing, and I accept it passively because I have no better model. And neither does she, and frankly, anything I've read in Young or James makes about the same amount of sense, but takes 50 times the new words, and I'm at a point in my life where minimizing neologisms, temporarily, friend, temporarily, seems like a good idea. But that's only when I don't say it out loud to myself. She said her own thoughts spin out on motive powers beyond my understanding. I laughed at this. She did too, because it was very funny. One time she claimed her body was a cylinder in a long hallway falling, sustained by the weight of the surrounding building, which was itself falling. And when I asked what she was smoking, she laughed so hard she woke Crinkle, the cat, up two rooms over and sent him loping for our bedroom, paradoxically, towards the source of the disturbance. She wore the t-shirt with the Honda logo that her brother bought her from Japan when he went far away on business, to some long chain of prefectures, bounding from hotel to hotel, both within and without countries, with the automatic translator glued to his right hand. A sleek, vulpine businessman made a joke that translates better in a Singaporean physiologist's ecumenical Chinese, for he was then in Singapore at the tail end of the trip, that the skin on his palm would overgrow the translator and it would be stuck there, low battery light blinking through a blister's irate cover for some painful stretch of unhealed time. It made me look delicately unhinged as a byproduct of the room inside her head. She was wearing the sunglasses within 7 hours. She had work early the next morning and had lain them out beside her folded jeans. Sometimes she gets me all the way to Archimedes Aquarium and stops there, on the front steps, next to a faded statue of two vaulting dolphins, riding a nascent wave. It's a little more than life-sized. This time she gets me there. We're on the steps and the fountain's actually running today. It's the sun and the professors that got them to fix it. When it gets hotter, more people want to look at fish. When it's cold, they still come by, though quieter, diminished, and they care less about fixtures. By now it's late summer, and the fall's a mere near promise, and the community college students are showing up with the same two marine science professors who have been entangled with the aquarium since its founding, along with their entourage of lesser staff and grad students, many stoned, inviting, somewhat listless sometimes, bound for either the real hard biological sciences or the marine subdivision of same, or the some local office job where they will hang calendars with sharks on them, or 16K shots of coral reefs, impossibly vibrant on waxy paper, to remind them of the disengagement of their current occupation. Those professors know us all by name, and they complain when it's hot out and the fountains aren't working, as is their grandfathered right. You're off when? She says. It's a true question, the first in no few sentences. 8.5 today. Not crazy. Not crazy at all. You know, she says, your promotion makes sense. The promotion is an idea she contrived from a story I told wrong that, ultimately, will result in disappointment and maybe an actual relationship problem. One of the guys who gets in the main hull tank and feeds the sharks for the guests lost his job, and the slot is technically open. I've been at the aquarium for a while, and aquarium brass values me in that de facto way understaffed local institutions do, shunting real responsibilities over and, despite lack of true zoological training, having me work often with animals and staff alike. I told her these two facts, the former recently, the latter fairly early in our seeing each other, and she connected the two across vast times and probabilities in such a way that, behind those sunglasses, I'm going to be one of the guys who feeds the sharks behind the glass and waves at field-tripped kids, shooting bubbles from a scuba suit and smiling like no other. So this is how it's going to be. I've long stopped saying I haven't actually been promoted because it doesn't seem to matter much. Across the parking lot, big pines move and smell. Small pines, geometric representations, dangle from rearview mirrors and don't shake the same in the breeze. You see them spread across the parking lot, an artificial distribution of the pineal approximations. And I don't much care if they're just sitting there. Not too many people park here this early. We share a lot with Dairy Spoon frozen yogurt and Wells Fargo, but they're as reclusive as they could be while remaining technically open, posted way across the lot and seldom visited in flocks. You know, I say, it's all tossed together. My manager tools through the parking lot in a Mini Cooper, bumper sticker. You're barely in the lines, animated bear picture. A crow freaks out in the strip of woodland by the creek. A bulldozer backs up somewhere beyond our clearing, past Cumberland Street, and a row of businesses and a secondary row of houses, beeping sharp into the mid-morning, cutting time into audible chunks like undigested chocolate squares and laying them out about our feet. Maybe. She says she knew so much more about fish when she was younger. She says Linnaeus was a distant friend. I still remember 2 dates in, when we went to this same aquarium and sat in the great hall and let ourselves be dwarfed by the glass and lights behind it. She said something on the generation of animals and let it fade so beautifully to silence. I don't know where she pulled that from, but sometimes we relive the moment, and though she, originally, didn't know where she got it from either, she has since figured out and refused to tell me. It's fine, though, even preferable. My begging for her to reveal her source was sarcastic in some way I can't quite wrap my head around, because I really, really didn't want to know. I once whispered species names when we sat in the Great Hall. Now I do differently. About 6 months after starting here, I reached that unavoidable position where I had to accept that I'd be here for a while. In doing so, I committed to an attempt to name as many individual animals as I could, to assign some personal form to those scaly constellations, maybe make a friend or two in the process. The larger sharks, sheepheads, tuna, etc., are named by the aquarium, obviously, though opinions start to dissolve when you get to the medial creatures. Smaller sharks have personal appellations, dependent on whoever is interacting with them at the moment, or none at all. The white-tipped reef shark with the speckles on his chin is called Spider, Pinhead, and Bitey too, by Enrique, Brian, and Allison, respectively. The likelihood that an animal will be personally named or individually addressed is, understandably, inversely correlated with their size. So me, feeling small at the end of a 6-month stint of steady acceptance, decided to go about naming as many as I can, starting with those with multiple unofficial names and ending, if possible, with the krill and sardines and even lesser creatures that, ultimately, would require some sort of schema to accurately address. And it wasn't really possible to do this, but that was the rebellion at its core. Now, on the rare occasion that me and Brenda find ourselves in that same great hall seat we did at our second structured meeting, beyond the blue wall of that biggest tank, I whisper the individual names granted to individual animals and, if necessary, the physical features that distinguish them. On the generation of names, she leans presently on my left shoulder, a slight lean. There's an old woman, smelling something like orchids towards the front, managing triplicate grandchildren. I'm off today, but we show up anyway. They needed me for about 30 minutes, and she walked around and read something pocket-bound and soft-cover, and sat in the employee break room while I plunged my arm into a broken filter and pulled out a warped sardine. Everything reeks of salt in this back room, and the sardine was bent parabolic around a tube inside a filter. Somehow, he had slipped past the grated guard. He unfortunately is and was unnamed. After death, it's not the same, but I call him Patrick 84 in the meantime. Patrick's 1 to 20 are understandably starfish, 21 to 82 are sea urchins. It's a flight of fancy that brought this name to the bigger tanks, the open water tanks, where the sardines all dart around each other and make smaller versions of the shapes their schools make in the wild. In 2030, someone from the State Aquatic Research Department recommended we install one of those automatic walkway clear shark tubes where the creatures swim above and around you, and people of all ages leave smeary hand marks on the glass, informed by the belt's speed. We said we couldn't afford it, and they politely dropped the topic for the remainder of the meeting, but they unleashed a continuum of weekly, daily, hourly emails that, ultimately, led to a factious debate within the organization about pressure and resources and how much money the Missouri and Southeastern Federate really wants to spend on aquariums. This number is still not public knowledge. Patrick 77 died of stress when a child picked him out of the touch pond and snagged his pokers in his sister's hair. Patrick 12 can extend her stomach from the source of all radial symmetry in the center of her body, one whole standard deviation longer than the average of the extensions of her peers. She'd do great in the wild. She suffers not for tenacity. Patrick 83, the first sardine so named, collided with Chorus 2, another sardine, identifiable from the Floridan shape of a fungal scar about her gills, and I was so happy that two named sardines were involved in the same 2-second incident that I wrote about it in the notebook. The notebook is ongoing, a fusion of accounting and tedious narrative. There are 18 individual books already filled, 3 subject books, college ruled, with green, blue, or yellow covers, denoted with labels from the aquarium's office label maker saying 1, 2 to 18, and piled up in a box beneath my bed. Brenda's commented on them exactly 5 times, and each time it didn't really matter. I know she reads them and takes great pains to prevent leaving any evidence of her doing so, though she knows I know for sure. There are times she looks at them suggestively form the mouth of the closet or the carpet by the bed, but she doesn't push. She accepts that gradually growing list of names as though it was breathing or sighing or between the two in difficulty. Some wrote automatic noise. There are 10 otters, all of which have already been named by aquarium staff. They first started trusting me with the tide pools. They had me go around thrice a week, feeding them. There was someone who was supposed to tend the one with the horseshoe crabs. They are notoriously finicky, but they found I had some knack for it. The size of the aquarium and the potency of our breeding program is not justified by the amount of money we bring in. The guy who was supposed to tend the horseshoe crabs became the 4th guy to don the wetsuit and feed the sharks, and the first of them to get let go. Evidently, he wasn't shady or lazy or anything like that. The sharks just didn't like him very much and didn't want to eat out of his hand. He reused a demotion. It was a standoff, I guess, in a protracted and pathetic way. 3 ways between him and aquarium brass and the municipal officials to whom he appealed. He could have gone back to tending the little tanks, or taken some of my duties with the tide pools and personnel, or even managed the gift shop. He didn't have to call me what he did. The outburst he gave towards the end of his time with us, of which I was one of many objects, was a little hurtful, but more confused than anything else. Regardless, I wish him well. He wasn't an antisocial guy. Imbricate patterns become the baseboards of your thought, and everything is seen suddenly through fish scales, at least when it's going okay. The smooth curve of her sunglasses lens seems somewhat foreign, or even unapproachable, when I get too deep into that kind of state. Sitting here, seeing the glasses resting on her lap, repeating the name of an oft-mentioned lionfish, I try to get her understanding. The tide pools eat as one when you feed them, like throwing mash down a gullet. A marine philosopher called them a life system before rejecting a position at our aquarium. I know better. Nothing's truly systematized here. Reused names sometimes demand Roman numerals, sometimes other things. My boss once claimed to have the vaguest understanding as to what the sharks were thinking. Speaking of the white tips, he would say, they go around a lot, around and around, just circles and sniffing sand. They think about food and almost nothing else but going in circles, and when it needs to happen, eggs, laying eggs, reproduction in clusters and all that. And the claims of this ichthyic armchair psychologist hung fertile in the air as I watched him, gently, scoop a dogfish from its little cleaning basin and expertly remove a parasite. Though not a man of science, he was used to their company. Despite the steady churn of marine biologists and other such majors from our local state and community colleges, there are few here holding degrees. It's not like we get a lot of applicants, but still, this guy, this ex-manager of a downtown Wendy's from somewhere in the southern states, declares himself the psychoanalyst of fishes, and we both allow and encourage his doing so. His boss has a degree, though, choral economics, with a minor in business. The major is about as specific as a bachelor can get. He likes drawing pseudo-fractals in the margins of envelopes, and once counted himself a geometer. Someone somewhere proved something about him, and my second-order manager, manager 2 times removed, general scientific consultant number 18, for partridge, cartridge, turbo fuel, who moonlights as an aquarium assistant manager, seemed, on some level, to found out to continue in that spatial line of work he once pursued, that being the design of artificial reefs. So sue me, he once said. So sue me. I saw a blueprint for a reef he was designing. He cited the theorem of Pappus 10,000 times. It's him that first brings me the good news. It's her that asks me about it 3 hours later, at the table, slightly perched with her sunglasses perched far up on her head like mirrors turned towards heaven. They reflect just the ceiling fan blades, blades unmoving. It stares through them and hits me at an obscure and unreachable angle as I pause, mouth open, at the base of my response. Yes, I got it. You did, she says. She knows. She knew. Like the coffee maker running plaintive in the background. She's always been one for evening coffee. She's kept this fragile undercurrent of expectation constant, gentle but firm against the base of my career, in such a way that bears no stress or vendetta or even prescription of the future, but just this, just statements of future fact, yet unverified by events. But now they are, I guess, and I've got the job. I don't know what it is about her that makes me overanalyze. I don't know exactly why she pushes the sole of her right, dusty running shoe against the far leg of the short table if she's not going to lean back. She's never been one to lean in chairs, but now she goes tap-tapping on the tabletop, and it almost demands a lean, insists on it, like the posture is all wrong and uncorrected without some charge in spinal angle. She asks without asking and tells without telling. And suddenly I'm thinking about the fourth lionfish I ever named, the second to last hatched at Archimedes, Precambria 1. I forgot which fish took Precambria 2, or if it even was a fish at all. There was a brief week where I named oysters. You're going to go in the tank, she says. I've been in the tanks before. To clean. You're going in to feed. That's kind of the job description. I laugh, and she politely doesn't. You know what you're doing in there. The sharks are only 4 feet long. We have a white tip that goes 7. They're like little missiles, she says. She's hinting at the lean. The front 2 legs will leave the floor, and she'll catch a strong angle with it. A true statement, beyond the orthogonal sit she's held the last 20 or so minutes, as we've listened to the coffee maker burbling. When she does, all noise will cease, and the promise of the afternoon will identify itself in its fruition, and I'll know, in microcosm, exactly where all this hinting has been going, and why I'm dealing with this at all. They are, I say, lean. I saw a video, National Geographic or something. You know they took Nat Geo off cable. I saw a video where 6 of them dismantled a dead whale, not white tips. You know the names more than I do. You'd be able to identify them, but dismantled a whale fall, and they were maybe 10 feet long, maybe longer, but the whale was floating down, bloated, really gross, and its eyes were shut and long drowned, and they actually got him while he was falling. I don't know but lean. You know more about this than I do, she says. I don't know if that's true. Take this dream from me. An albacore of appreciable size sits in a leather-bound chair across from a wizened version of my boss, maybe 65 in this hypothetical. My boss, not my boss's boss. He's wearing a vest and has a beard like Robin Williams in Good Will Hunting, and his glasses are pulled short and clean on the bridge of his nose. They do not dangle as they do in real life. He crosses one leg over the other and doesn't put a desk between himself and his patient. And through the window on the wall behind him, you can see the park fanning out, striped with walking trails, access roads, eucalyptus lines that shimmer in the breeze and hint at some further outside thing. The albacore is too large for all but the main tank at Archimedes Aquarium, and even then, it would be a stretch. From end to end, he could surpass the ceiling. Right now, he's hunched over uncomfortably, his fins folded in his lap, his entire posture an act of imaginative artifice I'm impressed my sleeping brain could come up with. He asks about the generation of animals, and my boss fails to respond. For a second, they sit in silence. The albacore has the voice of a drowned man dried out in the sun. His mouth moves as though hinged, and his eyes, though alert, are limited by their position on his head. The expressions he makes are somewhat correlated to human emotion, but it's difficult to tell exactly, for the whole morphology of the skull is completely foreign, completely unlike our own. The therapist, my boss, understands this and practices the patience he learned over 15 years of ichthytic psychiatry and psychotherapy, through dozens of units of twitted classes in which different species were compared, contrasted, presented in clumsy slideshows designed by those without an aesthetic background or passing interest in graphic design, bestrode by clip art and jumbled diagrams ripped from Soviet-era textbooks, and repeating phrases that, taken lonely, don't make the most sense, but taken all together, thread through with that central theme of the individual fish's well-being, they make the complete and utter sense that the simplest of geometric proofs make, those so simple that one's own interpretive process fails to intervene in their immediate understanding, the sort of apprehensive dream. So he listens to the albacore and counts the speckles on his side and tries to make it obvious that he is not paying any consideration to the way the fish's skin differs from his own. It's all just passive observation. This is obviously not a position a fish is supposed to maintain, but he perseveres for the purposes of the appointment. His gills heave without water, but something enables his survival. I could chalk it up to the logic of dreaming, but within this place, this silent spectator zone, it isn't quite that. Oxygenation aside, he's putting forth an honest effort. His voice, reverberatory with mechanical shrieking, conveys some human emotion. His fins, flailing out and in, are something like hands clasping and reclasping. And in this confluence of fish and man, I hear the following words, trickled out slowly over time. My boss, with his new beard, just nodding appreciative as the torrent trickles on. You know, I've never found myself in exactly this position, so forgive me. His voice sometimes dips out like it's remembering it's for the water, not natural on the land. For misunderstanding or not knowing exactly what I should say or try to, please forgive me. My boss, therapeutic, raises one hand. You're doing a lot better than I would if I was speaking underwater. The albacore makes a face that could be smiling, stretching his lower jaw as much as a jawed fish could muster, and shifting in that chair which, I realize, must be larger than your standard chair. There are these schools of little fish, little sardines. We go after them in groups. We don't. We'd call it something like you'd call hiking, just together. They're not tremendously hard to catch, and I know nobody who really dislikes the process, but sometimes people get tired. They get tired and speak formally and recommend places like this. There aren't a lot of fish psychiatrists. They recommend places like this, and they sometimes have other problems. I have a friend who's terrified, simply terrified, of shoals, sandy shoals without deep water. He can do okay if it's dark, but he says the light sand in the low waters like the back of a bone-plated giant, and he says it's an ancestral memory come back to bite him. I've heard of that before. He pulled a book. How he got this book, you'd have to ask him. He pulled a book with dinosaurs in it. Mosasaurs, this old fish with a great heavy head and plates sticking through its jaws that looked like a monstrous and colossal tadpole. You may know it, Dunkleostrauss or something. You'd know it better than I. It's been extinct for dozens times dozens times dozens of years. He says it in such a way that you immediately understand that he means something a little different by dozens, and that dozens times dozens is the numerical presentation of another, faraway culture, something like fiver in Watership Down or myriad in the speech of those old Greeks, a number great and momentarily immeasurable. He says swimming over shoals is like swimming over that fish's back. I tell him that fish is only the size of a small boat, or was, because it's extinct, has been for however long, and he says okay, but it's still the same. And I feel that too, sometimes, though not with the shoals or pursuit of sardines or anything like that, but just this. The address and redress. Not the words I'd use, but the words used by the guy who recommended you, man, your predecessor, who himself was a human and himself wore big vests. He was trying to tell me something about the past and wound up giving me the immediate future in terms of shoals and hydrography, and I had to leave in a huff. Do you get that? It isn't a question. And I had this premonition of him going home and thinking of this interaction and telling his wife a joke. He had this wedding ring, this silver wedding ring, that I saw on TV. This one that goes like, I don't know, a moth goes into a podiatrist office and complains about his life for a really, really long time. And the podiatrist says, wow, that's really sad. What do you want me to do about it? And the moth says, no. The podiatrist says, wow, I'm sorry, but I'm a podiatrist. Why did you come to me? Because podiatrists work on feet. And he, the moth, says, because the light was on. And I imagined him telling that joke to his wife, but it's me, a tuna, instead of a moth. And somehow the punchline, you can't tuna fish, comes in, and I'm listless at this point, running through our version of sobbing because you can't tuna fish. My boss sits for a minute before speaking. His sweater already screams professional comfort. That's very impactful, David. The albacore's name is David. But here you're all right. I'm not a podiatrist, and you're not a moth. There's a theatrical component to the feeding of the sharks. We prepare the food, sure, in the same unglamorous way we prepare all animals' food. We go to the back, deal with these big metal drums and basins and sinks that look like they're made for what they're used for, the washing of hands of fish guts. Then we compile all this reconjugated, membranous, ganglionic junk made from various meaty bits of various meaty creatures and reeking always of preservatives and the salt of the sea. I prepare it with my coworker, who is scuba certified alongside me, and who will go with me to the depths of a 15-foot tank. His father's a musician. There are people waiting. They love when we go in. It's thrilling, in a way. They don't know exactly what the risk is. We're diving down there amongst sharks that, though known to us to be relatively harmless, are not seen that way by the general public. That's the attraction, really. We go down there, smiling, risking something minor but major in their eyes to feed these living torpedoes disgusting chummy hunks of flesh. The kids love it, parents too, though they have some further understanding of the risk equation. Ultimately, it doesn't matter as much to them. They've seen the show before. I peek out before suiting up. She's here. Sitting between a field tripping elementary school and some staggered individual visitors, she watches politely the sharks. Her glasses are there, not tilted up as high, just threatening to come down over her eyes. For our first few dates, I forgot what color her eyes were. I knew they were amber, true, but what shade? There's a specificity to it that I needed that, thankfully, was only a distant cousin of language. It's the kind of color you have to see in real life. There, or around there, was the time I determined as rank fact her presence in my life, a constant that would maintain through front yards and three-quarter houses, through engagement and marriage, always a little bit beyond, not standing on the column but not altogether detached from it, maybe clinging to its base, or leaning on it with her shoulder. That's the image that persists. Brenda, for the classicists, Brenda of the statuary. She doesn't see me check if she's here, but she knows I'm doing so. She promised she'd come for my first performance. I'll watch you feed the sharks, she said. You are now the guy that feeds the sharks for real, or something like that. It turns epicycles in my head. My coworker's name is Alessandro, and he's done this 50 times. We crouch now at the top of the tank, holding these little sacks of food. An educator gives a speech to the small crowd on the other side of the glass. She explains the feeding habits and surprisingly docile nature of certain sharks. She explains the competence of our aquarium staff and the delightful maiden voyage of our newest shark feeder. There's a distant applause, and Alessandro looks over to me, right in the eye, and shrugs. They'll clap anyways, he says. He laughs. The sharks would too. I see them down there. They flit between big strands of kelp, the kelp mats at the surface. Us crouched above it on a catwalk, seeing our reflection on the leaves. My wetsuit's warm, even right up against AC vents. I don't know why they run it this late in the year. All right. The sharks seem so small from up here, even the big one. I didn't name the big one. The aquarium did that for me, and, as is my custom, I took the name they gave her. Ginger. Ginger shark in full. I don't know why. Alessandro goes in first and then me. We bear our bags for the crowd to see. Some organic matter blooms from bags imperfectly sealed, and the sharks move so quickly around our heads to grab it. Water runs across my ears, skin, hands. Through my mask and canned breathing, I see the crowd resolve to focus, all clustered across blocky seats, long benches especially made. She's out there watching. The educator continues to speak, but that's perfunctory. They look to us now. Mechanically, Alessandro scoops hunks of chum from his bag and tries to distribute them fairly. It all comes up from his hand in a fan, and the sharks frenzy about him. A cat-sized shark is scarier in the water. Same with all larger ones. The biggest ones are out and going around us, making like small submarines, controlled with a handset from a distance. Names come through. Billy, Crumpet, Ginger, Son of Ginger, Cuthbert, Fatty, Bitey 2. The great and marvelous second smallest shark in the aquarium, Mr. Calamari Squid Eater, ESQ, attorney at law and medical doctor superhero and best friend to Enrique, Shane, and mid-level Archimedes staff everywhere, and others. There's a vortical sense, being stuck in the middle of a feeding frenzy, shoveling out food. It's something like a hurricane. And then I really see him, really face to face. Ginger's gotten one mouthful and he's cycling back for a second. Alessandro raises his eyebrows behind his mask, and I can see the muscles moving around, all that polymer. He's making a funny face, I think. As I reach into my back and hear my canned breath, he flashes a diving sign I don't catch. It was out of the corner of my eye that I saw Ginger. He's not as wide up close, but he's significantly longer. He's definitely the length of a small car. It's to him that Alessandro points. He's the object of the diver's sign, but I don't know exactly what he's trying to say. Looking, just looking, I start to get the point. The beast has circled around the fray, going against the far concrete wall. He's brushed against the printout of a kelp forest that marks the end of the exhibit, and now he's coming back around. The arc seems prescribed. It's not the food coming out of the bag that drags him. Maybe that was the initial incentive. I don't know. I'm not the fish psychologist, or maybe something else. Either way, he's coming straight in my direction with a look that can only be described as linear, though that is, admittedly, the same look he always has. He is a fish, after all, and he's coming at me with a smile like a weakened parabola, and the teeth poking through, looking grim, regretful, and I think about white tip attack statistics and just how rare they're supposed to be. Alessandro's now moving away. He's still signing as the smaller shark follows him. They would never dream of biting. I see that now. I see what everyone who's ever been in this tank has seen. What she must now be seeing. If any shark was to attack, it would be the biggest one. Athwart Bubbles, it would be the largest silhouette. And, though he's never rejected anyone, now he threatens to. There must be divers he doesn't like. Have there been bites before? Most workplace injuries are trips, falls, little things. That holds for aquariums as well. But me, I've never had this or that. He's getting pretty close, and it's manifestly obvious that he's not looking at what's in my hand anymore. It's beyond him. He's graduated from chum. He doesn't need biomatter, prepared slipshod in metal basins. He needs material gleaned over decades, stacked atop itself, raised on sugary breakfast cereals and hamburgers and exotic subspecies of apples. Something wearing a wetsuit and now turning its head to look at its wife. She's watching and thinking the same thing. In this split second, when time thickens just enough to allow me to look over, she's now wearing sunglasses. I see the tank, brightly lit, reflected in miniature. Any other time, I wouldn't be able to make it out, but now, in the first calm stages of an instinctive panic, I couldn't halt if I tried. I can see every crystalline detail of this tank and its occupants. I can see Alessandro going for an unseen ladder, right above the glass, head tilted and bubbles escaping. I can see dogfish-sized white tips mixing with actual dogfish in droves in bright blue water, larger ones interspersed. I can see my own body, embarrassingly flailed, directly in the trajectory of Ginger, the big one, she of many teeth. It was a warning, evidently, those old signs in his hands. I see reflected impact. Ginger opens her mouth and tries to bite me head on, not tilting a bit, and it doesn't quite work. I don't see myself anymore, and I wonder how she could be so stupid as to not turn her body. She figures it out. Her jaws come down around my midsection and chum flies everywhere, and I'm turned around like the fan blades about the central turbine, seeing everyone spinning, all the bright lights of the tank and my own red going. I see Brenda again, for a second, split and split again, hair split thin, with all those guests around her, opening their mouths and generating screams. She has nothing to add to this generation of screams. She just sits there, maybe not afforded enough time to act, maybe unwilling to do so. Her hands are folded, as they were. Her glasses are down. They've been down, but how did they get there? And she's not smiling. I appreciate that. It's good that she's not smiling right now. Cold blood muscle strains beneath sandpaper skin, and I'm turned around again. Not pain, but pressure, and everything goes all topsy-turvy. She may now be rising to her feet.